Have you ever found yourself maybe wrestling with a really dense article or in a complex conversation, maybe at work,
Oh, definitely.
and you just wish you had a shortcut?
Right.
Not just to understand it, but to really master the nuances, to navigate those intricate discussions or, say, tricky cross-cultural interactions with, well, real precision.
Yeah, it's a feeling I think a lot of us share, especially now. We're just bombarded with information, right? And it's often layered with these subtleties that are just so easy to miss.
Absolutely. And that's precisely our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and pull back the curtain on what it truly means to achieve C2 English proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But look, this isn't just about a language level on a certificate. We see it more as a framework, a powerful one, for understanding complex ideas, navigating those tricky discussions, and communicating with, well, an extraordinary degree of precision.
And we've really gathered quite a stack of sources for you today. Everything from advanced English listening guides to some really deep research on language learning strategies, the cutting edge stuff, and also official exam prep materials. So it's a pretty comprehensive look at what it takes to master advanced English and, crucially, apply it to the real challenges you face.
So consider this your chance, maybe a shortcut even, to unlock a new level of sophisticated thought and expression. Doesn't matter where you are right now on your learning journey. Let's start digging in, shall we?
Let's do it. So when we talk about C2 English proficiency, we're really describing the absolute pinnacle, the top of the mountain for language achievement.
The pinnacle.
Yeah, it's that level where you can pretty much effortlessly understand almost anything you hear or read. But more than that, it's about expressing yourself with remarkable spontaneity, a natural flow, and this really extraordinary degree of precision and subtlety.
So it's clearly way more than just like getting by or even being generally fluent, isn't it?
Oh, much more.
It sounds like moving beyond just speaking well into a, I don't know, a higher echelon of thought and discourse.
That's a great way to put it.
What makes it this pinnacle? Why does this level of mastery actually matter in the real world, beyond just ticking a box on some test?
Well, that's the fascinating part. It's real-world impact. I mean, achieving C2 mastery means you're equipped to study the most demanding subjects, think postgraduate, PhD level.
Right.
You can negotiate, persuade really effectively at the highest levels of international business. It lets you deeply appreciate complex literature, engage with authority and formal debates. It's about profoundly enriching your whole linguistic experience.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of assessment, you mentioned sources like Cambridge English Qualifications and the CEFR. How is this C2 pinnacle actually well measured?
Right, so that's where the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR, comes in. It's the international standard, and C2 is right there at the very top.
Okay.
Now, when assessing writing and speaking at this level, examiners look at 4 key areas, or subscales: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language.
Okay. Content, I could guess, is about relevance, informing the reader. But communicative achievement, that sounds interesting. What does that actually mean at C2, alongside organization and language?
Good question. So communicative achievement at C2, it really gauges your mastery of genre conventions.
Genre conventions.
Yeah, meaning how well you can adapt your language for different situations. Is it a formal report, an informal chat? It's about not just what you say, but how effectively you tailor that message to your audience and purpose. Does it achieve its goal?
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
Then organization looks at coherence, your flexible use of things like cohesive devices, linking words, referencing, and just clear structuring in your writing or speech. And language, well, that covers a really wide range of vocabulary, precision, sophistication, control over style, complete grammatical accuracy, but all while sounding perfectly natural. And these are all marked on a 0 to 5 band scale. Which is useful, actually, because it can pinpoint specific areas for growth. You might have strong content, for example, but maybe your language accuracy needs a bit more work.
I can see how that kind of granular assessment really captures the nuance. What about listening, then, at C2? I imagine it's far more complex than just picking out a few keywords.
Oh, absolutely. C2 listening involves this sophisticated interplay of subskills, predicting what might come next, grasping the main idea, the just pinpointing key details, and crucially, understanding subtle opinions, attitudes, implied meanings. Our sources really highlight the difference between what's called bottom-up processing.
Okay.
That's basically decoding,
Right.
recognizing individual sounds, words, phrases, and then top-down processing,
Right.
where you use context, your background knowledge, the context, what's already been said to understand the meaning, even if some words are maybe unclear or spoken really quickly.
So it's about connecting the dots, understanding the bigger picture, even if you don't catch every single syllable. What are some of the biggest hurdles, then, for learners trying to master listening at this really high C2 level?
Well, several things come into play. The learner's overall language level, obviously, their awareness of different pronunciations, accents. Sure.
How familiar they are with the topic being discussed, and interestingly, their motivation.
Motivation. Really? How so?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Researchers find that while many learners focus hard on vocab or grammar, motivation isn't just another challenge. It often seems to be the hidden driver. It differentiates those who kind of plateau from those who push through to C2. It's like the fuel for that sustained effort you need.
That's a powerful insight. Motivation isn't just a soft skill, it's actually core to high-level mastery. So, okay, achieving C2 clearly requires a particular mindset, right? And a really strategic approach to learning. What have researchers found about the most effective strategies, especially for advanced learners?
You're absolutely right. Research with advanced learners consistently points to the importance of what are called language learning strategies, or LLSs, and they
Yeah.
tend to fall into two main categories: metacognitive strategies and cognitive strategies.
Okay, metacognitive sounds a bit academic. Can you break down what that actually looks like in practice for someone learning English? Yeah, it sounds more complex than it is. Metacognitive strategies are basically about thinking about your own thinking, your own learning process. So this means actively planning your learning, monitoring your own progress, your performance, evaluating what's working for you and what isn't. Think of it as being your own coach, really. Disciplined, reflective, setting goals, making the most of every chance to use the language, learning regularly, and constantly observing how you're doing.
Right. Being strategic about the process of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And cognitive strategies, how do those differ?
Cognitive strategies are more about the direct, hands-on engagement with the language itself.
Okay.
So this involves practices like reading aloud, analyzing text really deeply, maybe copying good examples of writing you admire, keeping a language journal perhaps, or even doing some creative writing where you can, as one source puts it, let yourself loose from the pressure to use perfect grammar and just experiment, play with the language.
I like that.
But the common thread for both types of strategies: conscious attention. Active engagement with the input, not just passively sort of soaking it in.
This makes me think about that popular idea we hear so often, learning styles. You know,
Yeah.
people say, oh, I'm a visual learner, or I'm definitely an auditory learner. Does that fit into this strategic approach at all?
That's an excellent point, and it lets us tackle a really persistent myth.
Hmm.
The idea of learning styles like the VA or K model, visual, auditory, reading, writing, kinesthetic, or even Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences is super popular.
Right.
Though it's important to note, Gardner himself called them intelligences, not styles. He was emphasizing different human capabilities, not necessarily specific teaching methods or preferred ways of just receiving information.
Okay, so what does the actual science say about matching teaching methods to these supposed styles? Because, I mean, intuitively it feels right, doesn't it? If I think I'm visual, surely visual learning works best for me.
Yeah, it feels right, but this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit counterintuitive. The overwhelming scientific consensus, actually, is that there's very little empirical evidence supporting the learning styles theory as it's usually applied.
Really. Little evidence.
Very little. A major review back in 2008 by Pashler and colleagues, for instance, looked at tons of studies and basically concluded there was, quote, no adequate evidence base to justify incorporating learning styles assessments into general educational practice.
Wow. So my preference doesn't necessarily mean it's more effective.
Yeah.
I might genuinely prefer learning through videos, let's say, but that doesn't actually guarantee it's the most effective way for me to grasp that specific concept.
Precisely. You might prefer it, absolutely. But that crucial link that learning only or best in that specific style leads to objectively better outcomes just doesn't have solid empirical backing. Common misunderstandings include thinking everyone has one fixed style learning is actually fluid, context dependent, or that matching teaching to style guarantees better performance, no solid proof, or even that you should avoid methods that don't match your supposed style.
Which could actually limit you, right?
Exactly. Actively avoiding other methods can seriously limit your growth and adaptability.
So if fixed learning styles aren't really the answer, what are the better evidence-backed alternatives for truly effective learning, especially for something as complex as language?
Well, our sources point to a couple of really powerful alternatives that seem to work for everyone. First is something called cognitive load theory.
Cognitive load theory.
Yeah, it focuses on designing learning materials and activities so they don't overwhelm your working memory, your mental bandwidth, essentially.
Right.
This means things like breaking down complex ideas into smaller, manageable chunks, providing really clear, concise explanations. It's about efficient information design that respects how our brains actually process new stuff.
Like making sure your brain's inbox doesn't just overflow when new information floods in.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the other alternative?
The second is metacognition again, that thinking about your own thinking.
Coming back to that.
Yes, because it's so important. It's about being really aware of your own learning process, understanding what strategies work for you in which specific contexts, monitoring your comprehension, am I getting this, and then actively adjusting your approach when you hit a wall.
So rather than saying I'm a visual learner, you might think.
You might think, I seem to remember that vocabulary much better last week when I used those picture flashcards. Maybe I should try that technique again for this new set of words. It's specific, it's self-aware, and it's highly actionable. Much more useful than a fixed label.
That feels much more empowering, actually. And how does learner autonomy fit into this whole C2 mindset?
Learner autonomy is absolutely critical, especially in, say, English as a foreign language, EFL contexts, where you might not have that constant authentic exposure. It really stresses the importance of being autonomous, self-directed in your learning, taking active responsibility for your own journey. It's about actively seeking out opportunities to use the language, monitoring your own progress, pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
So it's about really being your own most effective teacher, in a way.
Yeah.
And just quickly, what are some of the ineffective strategies that learners should maybe consciously try to avoid?
Yeah, the research is pretty clear on a couple of things. Rote memorization of vocabulary without really understanding its meaning and how it's typically used in context that's largely ineffective for long-term recall and use.
Okay.
Similarly, just passive reception of language input. Just listening to things or reading without actively engaging your brain, reflecting on it, that's unlikely to lead to significant progress. Conscious attention and active engagement are paramount.
Got it. Okay, now this C2 proficiency, it isn't just about how you learn, is it? It's fundamentally about how you apply that mastery to understand and talk about the complex issues shaping our world. It allows us, as you said, to peel back the layers, reveal deeper truths, move beyond just surface-level descriptions to really analyze and articulate what's going on underneath. So let's try applying this C2 lens to some real-world case studies, starting with something incredibly relevant today, the digital dilemma, or, well, digital addiction.
Yeah, a topic I'm sure resonates with many, many people listening. At its core, digital addiction is defined as that compulsive, excessive use of devices that negatively impacts your well-being.
Right.
It's not just liking technology. It's when its use actively disrupts your life in significant ways.
And the warning signs are probably pretty familiar, right? That anxious, maybe easy feeling when you're offline, losing all track of time when you are online,
Definitely.
ignoring real-life duties, work, chores, relationships because your screen is calling, and, of course, poor sleep quality. I mean, who hasn't picked up their phone just for a second and suddenly an hour has vanished?
Right. And that phenomenon isn't accidental. There's a clear psychology behind it. Tech companies, well, they design apps and platforms specifically for engagement.
How so?
Think about things like infinite scrolling, constant push notifications, the powerful pull of social validation, likes, comments, follower counts. They tap directly into dopamine.
The brain chemical.
Exactly. The pleasure and reward chemical messenger. Every like on a post, for instance, releases a little burst of dopamine, making the experience inherently, well, addictive.
So those little pings, those little hearts, they're actually wiring our brains to want more, creating what the sources call a reinforcement loop. Check phone, get reward, crave more.
Precisely. Your brain becomes wired to expect instant gratification, which, ironically, makes it harder to engage with things in real life that require more patience, more sustained effort.
Like reading a book, maybe.
Exactly. This constant overstimulation can lead to what people call digital burnout, and it genuinely seems to shrink our attention spans, making it harder to focus on things that demand concentration.
And the consequences, they're significant, aren't they? They ripple through our lives. Things like a higher risk of anxiety, depression.
Lack of restorative sleep, partly due to the blue light exposure.
Right.
Social isolation, ironically, despite being constantly connected online, and strained real-life relationships. It's a clear cause and effect. You might see someone whose grades have plummeted because of their screen addiction, or someone who's become emotionally disconnected from their family.
And there's some specific C2 level vocabulary that helps discuss this precisely.
Absolutely. Words like compulsive, chronic digital addiction, of course, screen time.
Well,
We mentioned the reinforcement loop, instant gratification, overstimulation, digital burnout. Then there's doom scrolling.
yes, endlessly reading bad news.
Right. FOMO, the fear of missing out. Talking about solutions, you might use digital detox. And looking at the mechanisms, perhaps algorithmic addiction or disconnection anxiety.
So understanding this whole psychological framework, how do we find a healthier balance? What are the effective solutions people talk about?
Well, practical advice often includes things like turning off non-essential notifications, basically reclaiming your attention.
Taking back control.
Exactly. Setting firm screen time limits, designating specific tech-free zones, maybe the dinner table, the bedroom, to create those crucial boundaries. Some people even find using grayscale mode on their phone helps, makes it less visually stimulating.
Interesting.
But perhaps most importantly, it's about consciously replacing those digital habits with real-life activities. Spending time outdoors, picking up a hobby, prioritizing actual face-to-face connection.
So this all kind of boils down to cultivating self-discipline, maybe, and practicing mindfulness, which the sources define as being fully present in the moment.
Precisely. It's about making deliberate, conscious choices about how you use technology rather than letting it control you.
Okay, now let's shift our C2 lens again to another incredibly complex global issue, one requiring immense nuance and impartiality in how we discuss it: humanity on the move, the global refugee crisis.
A very challenging topic, indeed.
Yes. So to start, let's make sure we have our definitions crystal clear. What exactly is a refugee, and how does that differ from other terms we hear, like asylum seeker or migrant?
That's crucial. A refugee, according to international law like the 1951 Refugee Convention, is someone who has been forced to flee their own country because of a well-founded fear of being persecuted.
Persecuted for specific reasons.
Yes, persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. The key thing is they are fleeing immediate, real danger. They haven't simply chosen to move for, say, economic betterment, which is more associated with the term migrant.
Okay. And how do terms like asylum, displacement, and exile fit into this picture?
Yeah.
They often seem to get used interchangeably in the media.
They're related but distinct. Asylum is the protection a host country offers to someone who has fled persecution and is seeking refuge within its borders. An asylum seeker is someone who has applied for asylum but hasn't yet had their claim decided. Displacement is a much broader term. It refers to any forced movement of people from their homes. This could be internal displacement within their own country or across international borders.
Okay.
And exile usually refers to being formally barred from returning to one's country or choosing to live elsewhere, often for political reasons or fear of repercussions if they went back. So a refugee is a specific legal category of displaced person who has crossed an international border due to persecution.
The sheer scale of this crisis is just staggering. What kind of numbers are we talking about globally?
Well, recent data from the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, indicates that over 110 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced from their homes.
110 million.
It's a population roughly the size of Japan, and among those, around 35 million are recognized as refugees under UNHCR's mandate. The top countries people are fleeing from consistently include places like Syria, Afghanistan, and Venezuela, reflecting ongoing conflicts and deep humanitarian emergencies.
So what are the primary driving causes behind this immense displacement? What forces compel people to leave everything behind?
Several key factors are consistently identified in our sources. Armed conflict and war is obviously a major driver. Widespread violence just shatters safety, destroys infrastructure, leaving people with absolutely no choice but to flee for their lives.
Like in Syria.
Exactly. The Syrian civil war, for example, tragically displaced over 13 million people, both internally and externally. And terms you hear like insurgency or fragile ceasefires really highlight the kind of prolonged instability that forces people to keep moving.
And beyond active fighting, what else pushes people to seek safety elsewhere?
Political persecution is another huge factor. This means unjust treatment or harm because of someone's political views or activities. It can range from systematic discrimination all the way to arrest, imprisonment, torture, even death.
Right.
We often see journalists, activists, opposition leaders seeking asylum under these circumstances. It's often linked to systemic oppression and tyranny in their home countries.
What about other severe human rights violations? Are those distinct drivers?
Yes, absolutely. Egregious violations like ethnic cleansing, systematic torture, forced labor. These create an environment of absolute terror for targeted groups. And then you have the most extreme terms like genocide or widespread persecution, describing systematic attempts to wipe out or severely ill-treat entire populations based on their identity.
And it's not just human-made conflict, is it? We're increasingly hearing about natural disasters and climate change impacting migration.
Definitely. That's a growing factor. Sudden catastrophic disasters, think major floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, can instantly render whole areas uninhabitable. But also, the more gradual long-term impacts of climate change are crucial. Things like prolonged droughts turning farmland into desert, rising sea levels threatening coastal communities, general resource scarcity. These destroy livelihoods and force entire communities to migrate, sometimes preemptively. This has led to terms like climate refugees or environmental refugees, though their legal status is still debated internationally.
So when millions are forced from their homes and seek safety in other countries, what are the consequences for those host countries? Let's maybe start with the social impact.
Okay. Socially, the impact can be considerable, especially with a large, sudden influx. There's immediate pressure on public services, healthcare, housing, schools.
Sure.
Integration presents really significant challenges. Language barriers, cultural differences, not to mention the profound trauma many refugees carry with them. And unfortunately, this complex situation can sometimes be exploited to fuel negative sentiments, leading to a rise in xenophobia, that's the fear or hatred of foreigners.
And economically, we often hear it framed as purely a burden, but is that the whole picture?
It's much more complex than that. Yes, there's often an immediate economic burden on host countries for providing basic needs: food, shelter, healthcare. But refugees can also contribute significantly to the economy over time. They often fill labor shortages, bring diverse skills, start new businesses, pay taxes, and remittances, the money refugees might eventually send back to family in their home countries, also indicate economic activity and integration. So the long-term economic impact really seems to depend heavily on how well refugees are integrated into the workforce and society.
And politically, how does a large refugee influx affect a host country's governance and policies?
Politically, it can be quite volatile. It often leads to major policy shifts, particularly around immigration laws and border controls. Governments might tighten security measures. And unfortunately, it can sometimes fuel the rise of nationalist or populist sentiments, often playing on concerns about national identity or sovereignty, a country's ultimate control over its territory and borders. Detention centers are another politically charged aspect, used to hold asylum seekers while claims are processed, but frequently criticized for conditions and human rights implications.
Given all these immense complexities, social, economic, political, what solutions are being proposed? And what does global responsibility really look like here?
Well, tackling a crisis of this scale requires coordinated international cooperation. That involves organizations like the UNHCR, numerous NGOs, and national governments working together.
For what specifically?
Primarily for providing critical humanitarian aid, the immediate life-saving assistance, but also for sharing the responsibility for resettlement, which means transferring refugees from often overcrowded first asylum countries to third countries willing to offer them permanent residence. And crucially, any long-term solution has to involve addressing the root causes of displacement back in the countries of origin, conflict, persecution, instability.
And the role of local communities in host countries seems absolutely vital in this whole process.
Completely vital. Local communities often play the most direct role in integration through grassroots support networks, language tutoring, cultural exchange programs, job assistance, and simply offering friendship and a welcoming environment. This really highlights the importance of fostering empathy, genuinely trying to understand and share the feelings of others, especially those who've endured trauma and advocacy, speaking out against misinformation, challenging stereotypes, and promoting inclusive policies. These are key to bridging divides.
It's so clear listening to this how specialized vocabulary is absolutely critical for discussing such a sensitive topic with the necessary precision. Terms like persecution, displacement, resettlement, xenophobia, humanitarian aid, oppression, tyranny, genocide.
Absolutely.
And even the grammatical choices we make, like using modal verbs such as should or must when talking about solutions, or the way the passive voice is often used in news reports about refugees, these can subtly reflect different perspectives and values.
That's a very astute point. The language itself shapes the narrative.
Yeah. Let's move on to our third case study, which really tests the limits of C2 communication skills. Bridging divides, mastering cross-cultural communication. In our globalized, digitally connected world, this skill isn't just nice to have, it feels indispensable.
Absolutely indispensable. And it's far more complex than people often assume.
So what exactly is cross-cultural communication? Is it just about, translating words accurately?
Far from it. At its heart, it's the exchange of information between people from different cultural backgrounds. But the crucial part is that this involves navigating unspoken norms, underlying beliefs, core values, and a whole host of verbal and nonverbal cues that vary wildly across cultures.
Right.
Your sources really emphasize how critical this is for success in pretty much any field today, given how much people travel, work on international teams, and communicate digitally across borders.
And I can immediately imagine there are countless challenges leading to those awkward moments or even serious misunderstandings where you just sense something went wrong, but you can't quite pinpoint what. What are some of the biggest pitfalls people encounter?
Well, one of the most obvious is language barriers, but it goes beyond just fluency levels. It's often about idioms, slang, culturally specific references.
Like, let's touch base.
Exactly, or break a leg. If you don't know the cultural context or the intended nuance, it frequently leads to misinterpretation or at least significant ambiguity. You think you understand, but you don't, really.
So you might think you're on the same page, metaphorically speaking, but you're actually miles apart. What about nonverbal communication? That seems like a huge minefield.
It's a massive area for potential misunderstanding, partly because so much of it operates below our conscious awareness. Culturally specific cues like eye contact, for instance.
How so?
Well, in some Asian cultures, avoiding direct eye contact, especially with superiors, shows respect. In many Western cultures, the same behavior might be interpreted as shyness, dishonesty, or lack of confidence.
Wow, complete opposites.
Exactly. And think about gestures. A simple thumbs up is positive in some places, but deeply offensive in others. Or proxemics, which is the study of personal space preferences. How close people stand when talking varies enormously, and violating those norms can make people very uncomfortable. It's like a whole silent language that varies dramatically culture by culture.
And stereotypes and bias must be another major pitfall, something that can unfortunately creep into our interactions almost without us noticing.
They absolutely are. Stereotypes involve overgeneralizing supposed cultural tendencies. The punctual German, the reserved Brit, the expressive Italian. While there might be cultural trends, applying these rigidly to individuals leads to unfair prejudice or preconceived notions, as one source puts it.
Right.
These generalized ideas obscure individuality, perpetuate inequality, and fundamentally hinder genuine connection. Becoming aware of your own biases and actively challenging these stereotypes is absolutely crucial for effective and respectful cross-cultural communication.
And beyond these individual pitfalls, there are also broader patterns, right? Distinct communication styles that vary across cultures. How do these manifest?
Yeah, researchers often talk about several key dimensions. One is direct versus indirect communication.
Okay.
Direct cultures, like maybe the US, Germany, the Netherlands, tend to value clarity, explicitness. People generally say what they mean, even when disagreeing. The report needs more data.
Pretty straightforward.
Whereas indirect cultures, Japan, Korea, many Latin American cultures perhaps often prioritize harmony, saving face for both speaker and listener. Communication might be more subtle, relying on hints, suggestions, especially when conveying negative feedback or disagreement. Instead of a blunt no, you might hear something like, that could be difficult, or maybe we can explore other options.
That sounds like a recipe for misunderstanding if you're not attuned to it. And then there are high context versus low context cultures. What's that about?
This relates to how much meaning is derived from the explicit words versus the surrounding context. In high context cultures, think Japan, China, many Arab cultures, a lot of meaning is conveyed implicitly through shared background knowledge, nonverbal cues, the history of the relationship, the overall situation. Less needs to be spelled out explicitly because much is understood from the context. In low context cultures like the US, Germany, Scandinavian meaning is primarily conveyed through explicit direct language. People tend to spell things out more clearly and precisely, relying less on unspoken understanding. Contracts are detailed, instructions are explicit.
That's a really useful distinction. And finally, power distance. How does that influence communication?
Power distance refers to the extent to which less powerful members of a society accept and expect that power is distributed unequally.
So, hierarchy.
Exactly. In high power distance cultures, many Asian, Latin American, African nations, deference to authority is expected. Communication styles reflect this hierarchy. You use formal titles, you might be hesitant to contradict a superior openly. In more egalitarian, low-power distance cultures like Denmark, Israel, Austria, power is seen as more distributed. People are more likely to challenge authority. Communication is often more informal across ranks. What's seen as perfectly respectful behavior in one context might seem jarringly informal or even insubordinate in another.
It's incredibly complex. So how do we even begin to bridge these kinds of divides and genuinely master cross-cultural communication? What's the path forward?
Well, it fundamentally starts with developing an appreciation for nuance, understanding those subtle differences in meaning, expression, and behavior that are so easily missed, but are so vital for avoiding offense and building trust. Empathy is absolutely crucial. The ability to genuinely try and understand and share the feelings of others, to see the world from their perspective, even if it's very different from your own. This helps avoid misconceptions, like assuming silence always equals agreement, or that directness is always rudeness.
And I imagine adaptability is just non-negotiable here.
Totally. Being willing and able to adjust your own communication style, your nonverbal cues, your expectations, and your behavior to fit new cultural environments is essential. You can't just expect everyone else to communicate like you do. This leads to the concept of cultural intelligence, or CQ, which is more than just knowing facts about different cultures. It's about having the practical skills to apply that knowledge effectively, to adjust your behavior appropriately in real-time cross-cultural situations. It's about being able to accurately read the room no matter where you are in the world.
Can you give us maybe a quick, concrete, real-life example of these challenges playing out, something we can instantly visualize?
Sure. Let's revisit that compliment scenario. Anna from the US says to her colleague Lee from China, "Lee, your presentation was amazing. Your English is incredible."
Okay, a common compliment.
Right. Lee might respond with something like, "Oh, no, it wasn't that good. My English still needs a lot of work." Now, Anna, coming from a relatively low-context, direct culture where you generally accept compliments graciously, might interpret Lee's response as false modesty, maybe even a lack of confidence.
But that's not necessarily what Lee means.
Probably not. In many East Asian high-context cultures, deflecting or downplaying a compliment is actually a culturally ingrained sign of humility and respect for the person giving the compliment. It avoids appearing boastful. So Lee's response was likely perfectly appropriate and polite within her cultural context, while Anna's interpretation was filtered through her own cultural lens. Neither is wrong. They're just different.
That makes it so clear. Okay, let's try another quick one, maybe illustrating direct versus indirect disagreement.
Okay. Imagine Carlos from Mexico and Yuki from Japan are discussing a project proposal. Carlos, perhaps from a culture slightly more comfortable with direct disagreement among peers, might say, "Honestly, Yuki, I don't think this part of the plan is feasible."
Pretty direct.
Yuki, potentially from a more indirect culture where maintaining harmony is paramount, might express a similar reservation by saying something like, "That's an interesting perspective. Perhaps we could also consider exploring option B as well."
Much softer.
Exactly. Someone like Carlos, if not attuned to indirect communication styles, might completely miss the fact that Yuki is politely but clearly signaling disagreement or concern about the original idea. He might just think Yuki is adding another option, not challenging his.
These examples just highlight so powerfully why that C2 level of articulation is so incredibly important. The power of precise language use, but also understanding the unspoken context.
Absolutely.
Our sources really emphasize this. C2 vocabulary isn't just about passively knowing a lot of words. It's about achieving that unparalleled clarity, that really impressive level of verbal precision in your actual communication.
It gives your communication immense depth and authenticity. It allows you to move beyond just stating a fact to painting a genuinely nuanced, accurate psychological or situational picture.
It's about being able to choose the single best word to convey not just information, but a specific shade of meaning, a particular emotion, a precise quality, or a complex relationship. This active, confident, and precise usage is really what distinguishes C2 mastery.
Exactly right.
So let's maybe showcase a few examples from the sources to bring this C2 vocabulary to life. How about some words that allow us to describe people or their inner worlds with incredible specificity?
Okay, great idea. So instead of just saying someone is clever, you could use ingenious, which paints a picture of inventive brilliance, maybe someone who comes up with clever original ideas or solutions.
Nice.
But be careful not to confuse it with ingenuous, which looks similar but means innocent, maybe a bit naive, open and trusting, a very different inner quality.
Right, good distinction.
Or rather than just funny, you might describe someone's manner as jocular, implying a consistently lighthearted, humorous, jesting disposition. And to capture a specific kind of negative mood, think morose. It doesn't just mean sad, it means distinctly bad-tempered, gloomy, sullen. These words don't just describe, they really illuminate the person.
And what about words that let us describe reality or situations or qualities with that same C2 level of precision?
Well, you might use inherent to describe a quality that exists as a natural fundamental part of something, like an inherent risk. Or intrinsic, which is similar, meaning essential or belonging naturally, like the intrinsic value of education.
Okay.
Instead of just tired or lazy, someone could be described as lethargic, suggesting a real lack of energy, sluggishness, apathy. A speaker whose points are very clear might be praised for their lucid arguments, meaning clearly expressed, easy to understand, rational. And to describe a lack, meager means lacking in quantity or quality. Think meager resources or a meager portion. It implies insufficiency, sparseness. These words allow you to capture the very essence of a situation with accuracy.
It really is about finding the exact word for your thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about words that capture dynamic processes or consequences? The kinds of words that help us analyze situations.
Absolutely. For instance, instead of just saying someone started a fight or a project, you could use instigate. It often implies provoking or stirring something up, sometimes with negative connotations, but it can be neutral too, like instigating change. If you're completely swamped with emails or tasks, you might say you're inundated, literally flooded, overwhelmed by an excessive amount. When discussing solutions to problems like climate change, policies might aim to mitigate the effects, meaning to make them less severe, less harmful, less painful.
Mitigate, right.
For two events happening at the same time or two ideas being similar, they coincide. And finally, instead of just waste, you could use squander. You squander things like money, resources, or opportunities, implying a foolish, reckless, or wasteful loss.
Those are definitely powerful and precise. And for higher level discussions, critical thinking, what C2 words allow for that really deep analysis and evaluation?
Good question. To describe complex arguments that are still understandable, you might call them intelligible. For really insulting, abusive, or highly critical language, the term is invective. If something, maybe a speech or a piece of writing, lacks energy, interest, or flavor, it's insipid, basically dull or bland.
Insipid, okay.
To express deep grief or sorrow, often publicly, you lament. For a touch of humor or lightness, especially in a serious situation, that's levity. A false written statement that damages someone's reputation is specifically libel, as opposed to slander, which is spoken.
Libel, right.
And for something utterly foolish, unreasonable, or absurd, you'd call it ludicrous. Other really useful terms that come up constantly in advanced discourse include ambiguity, when something has more than one possible meaning, causing confusion, cliché, an overused phrase or idea that's lost its impact, and paradigm, a model, a standard, or a clear example often used in paradigm shift to mean a fundamental change in thinking or approach.
It's incredible how specific and evocative this level of vocabulary can be. Now, just quickly, let's highlight a few advanced phrases or perhaps some key verbs that are essential tools for this C2 level of articulation.
Certainly. Some really useful phrases include clear the air, which means to resolve tension or bad feelings between people. Trial and error is a common way to describe finding a solution by experimenting and learning from mistakes. To be at odds over something or at odds with someone means to be in disagreement or conflict. For absolute certainty, you might say something is true beyond a doubt or beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you feel you lacked the experience or knowledge needed for a particular situation, you're out of your depth. And to represent someone or something accurately and fairly, you aim to do them justice, or do it justice.
Those are great, very practical, and some of those really impactful C2 verbs.
Okay, let's see. We have relish, which means to really enjoy something with great pleasure and anticipation, to savor it. To label someone or something can mean to identify or categorize them, but often implies doing so in a simplistic or negative way.
Right.
It's really important at this level to distinguish imply to suggest or communicate something indirectly, from infer to deduce or conclude something based on evidence or reasoning, they're often confused.
Good point.
When you're guessing about something without having enough information or evidence, you speculate. And finally, to succumb means to lose the determination to oppose something, to give in to pressure or temptation. Or, sadly, it can also mean to die from an illness or injury.
Wow. What an incredible journey we've really been on in this deep dive. We started by defining C2 English proficiency, the pinnacle of language mastery. Then we explored the strategic, evidence-based approaches to learning that actually work, debunking some myths along the way.
Like the learning styles one.
Exactly. And then we applied that C2 lens to unpack some really complex global issues: digital addiction, the global refugee crisis, the fascinating, often tricky nuances of cross-cultural communication.
And through all of that, I think we've reinforced that vocabulary mastery, especially at this level, isn't just about passively knowing meanings stuffed in your head somewhere. It's fundamentally about active, confident, and precise usage. High-level English users don't just speak, they articulate complex thoughts clearly. They don't just write. They can persuade, analyze, and dissect ideas with really unparalleled clarity.
So our encouragement to you, listening, is to actively try and apply these insights. Make a conscious effort, maybe starting today, to integrate some of this C2 vocabulary into your daily conversations, into your writing,
Yeah.
even if it feels a little bit challenging or unnatural at first.
Yeah, push yourself a bit.
Notice this kind of language when you're reading and listening. And maybe most importantly, continue to cultivate that metacognitive self-awareness and that adaptability in your own learning and communication journey.
And perhaps this leaves us with a final, truly profound thought for you to maybe mull over long after this deep dive is finished. How does the active application of a sophisticated vocabulary shape not just your language, but potentially your very thinking?
Ooh, interesting question.
By being open to experimenting with different ways of learning, maybe multimodal approaches, and by actively engaging with complex topics like the ones we discussed, how might you unlock entirely new ways of understanding the world around you and expressing yourself with that unparalleled clarity, nuance, and depth we've been talking about?